Welcome to Nantucket Community Television's coverage of the 2020 annual town election, which will be held on Tuesday, June 16. I'm Charlie Walters, and for the next half hour, working remotely due to the coronavirus pandemic, I'll be interviewing Jason Bridges, one of three candidates seeking to fill two three-year terms on Nantucket Select Board.
Good to see you.
You are an incumbent. Why do you want to continue to serve on the board?
You know, when you serve on a board like this, you think 3 years is a long time, and you're going to get so much done. And the way local government moves, it's at a slow pace, and so you're just kind of getting things started. And you're in the middle of all these projects that you're passionate about, and that you've worked on with different constituents and town departments and commissions and committees, and you want to keep it going. So bigger picture, I want to serve. I want to serve another term, another 3 years.
The dominant issue at the moment is, of course, the coronavirus pandemic. I've got a number of things to ask you about it, but let me start with this one. Brian Turbot, the finance director of the town, is forecasting a $6.1 million shortfall this year. That's based on a budget of around $100 million. Maybe you have the exact figure. Keeping in mind that you're not on the finance committee, how should the town address this shortfall?
We somewhat already have, and I think we're heading in the right direction. We're very, very fortunate to have almost $10 million in free cash. And so us to have the option to not do certain capital projects and to be able to cover a lot of that loss, if that happens, if we get to that 60% catastrophic loss that Brian, our finance director, is predicting, that helps a lot of it. I think we've cut, we have not cut jobs or furloughed, cut services yet, but all of the positions that have not been filled, say if somebody left, not been filled, those are not going to be filled. We're not taking on any new positions. And then we're also in the middle of collective bargaining with all the unions. And that presents another difficulty. But it's good that's happening now, so we can think about the next couple of years. And so I think our finance director has done a great job of giving different options. And I think where we're at right now is, I hope it doesn't get to 60%. I hope it's 20 or 30, but the majority of that $10 million that comes in, right, that the meals and rooms tax and ferry embarkation fees, we know it's going to be big this year, in fiscal year 21. So I think that 60% is probably pretty close, but let's hope it's 30 or 40.
Well, let's go on to something that's related to what you just said. How concerned are you about summer visitors coming here from all over the United States, and in numbers we don't know what those numbers will be yet?
How concerned I am on a scale of 1 to 10, 9.5. I think what we saw on Memorial Day weekend with most restaurants were downtown were down 95%. My little shop was down 70%. People did not come, right? There's a lot of second homeowners who are here, but the day trippers and because there's no short-term rentals right now, it just didn't come. What's going to happen in July and August as things are lifted up? That's the big question, and how are we going to handle it? I think the state regulation, the state is going very measured and very slow. And there's a lot of people that are angry about that, especially in the business sectors, that they're not moving fast enough. So I think we're going to be okay because the education is here. Because when you come to this island, you see that the majority of everyone is wearing masks. When you leave here and you go down, I had a friend that just left and went down to Florida, moved down there, nobody's wearing masks, right? So we are doing it differently. Because we're close to New York City and Boston, we've seen how real it is and how bad it can get. I think people are taking it serious here. So when those people do come from different parts of the United States, like you suggested, we have to educate them. They have to know right when they get off the plane, the boat, how to be successful here, how to join in our success.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, none of us does, but based on what Governor Baker has laid out in his 4 phases, do you foresee Nantucket possibly enacting its own more stringent regulations about what people should be doing when they come here this summer?
I think we will, but I can't predict which ones where it's gonna be. I think there's gonna be areas where we're gonna ask for less restriction because it just doesn't make sense here. As you know, Charlie, everything's different on Nantucket, and there's gonna be some areas where we might want to restrict a little more. And I think it's going to depend a lot on personal responsibility, about how people behave here. Of course, some of it will be connected to just the overall, hospitalizations and positive tests in Massachusetts and on the island. But a lot of it's going to depend on how do we behave. And a great example is the beaches. There's no way our town can monitor every single beach at all times. We just don't have the manpower. If people don't take personal responsibility and don't do what they're supposed to do and social distance and only have so many cars on each beach, there's going to be capacity limits. The only thing that the town is going to have to do to keep it safe is to shut it down. So really the choice is on us. It's on the visitors. It's on the year-round community to be able to do the right thing and take personal responsibility, right? And if not, then certain precautions will have to be taken to keep things safe.
In recent years, Nantucket has relied on a lot of summer workers who come into the United States using visas. And visas right now are not being given out. This obviously has to have an effect on Nantucket, and it's beyond the town's control. It's down in Washington where these decisions get made. But my question is, can the town of Nantucket exert influence in Washington, to affect policy that might be advantageous to Nantucket regarding those visas?
I think Nantucket absolutely can, Charlie. I mean, we have so many people who are connected all over this United States and the globe, whether it's a phone call or writing letters. The business community and the owners of the bigger businesses, I think are connected and can influence. Will it work? I don't know, but I think we do. Our larger Nantucket community, I think, does have influence, and whether it's with our state reps or our representatives and our senators from Massachusetts, I think they do listen when we reach out to them.
You being in the restaurant business, you know much more about this than I ever will, but there's a lot of talk about restaurants having seating out of doors. Restaurants that ordinarily wouldn't have outside seating. And that would be on sidewalks, of course, which are public spaces. A lot of thoughts are being thrown around. Do you see this happening one way or another? Speaking as a select board person rather than a restaurant person.
Yes, I do. What it looks like, I'm not sure. I've tried to be really careful with trying to be a policymaker and not get into the details. So I really want us to have really creative use of open space for restaurants, retail, for people to sit outside, which is where we want to be during this pandemic, is outside, right? And we can be creative to help our businesses, help them thrive in this new normal. And I think we can do it. Now, which street and which sidewalks do we close down? That's going to be up to public safety and town officials who are looking at all the ins and outs. But I think we can do it. I think we can be creative. Anybody can do it. It's Nantucket. We're the most innovative county. Sorry, Boston, Cambridge, in the Commonwealth.
Let me switch tracks here to forms of government. And you have a maybe not a unique perspective, but you certainly have a different perspective from the average Nantucketer because you are currently involved in town government. Nantucket's form of town government in the way of annual town meeting especially has been a constant discussion topic for a number of years. And I think during the pandemic, it has become yet again a big topic, although maybe from a slightly different angle. What are your thoughts on Nantucket's form of government? And let's start with the annual town meeting.
Charlie, I've been pretty vocal on this the last couple of years. I thought one way before I got onto the select board, and then once I'm really in it, it kind of reinforced everything that I saw. Nantucket it looks like this small rural, resort island, but we have $100 million budget. If you add in all of the airport and sewer, our island home, we're up to $140 million. We're a small city and we have big city issues and problems. And you have Now, I'm obviously running for the select board, but you have 5 volunteers making all the policy decisions and doing the best that they can. For the town meeting, ideally, it has the potential to be the best form of democracy. It really does. And it probably was decades and decades ago when there's less people here. But with the issues that we have and with 10,000 registered voters, I don't know if it's as representative as it should be. One thing that I always kind of refer to is our school system is 50% people of color. If you go to our town meeting, it's 99% white, right? It's not representative. And that's not, there's no one to blame for that. But we're seeing the cracks in this system as our issues get more complex. Like nowhere else in Massachusetts has the amount of coastlines that we do. And our problems are, as I referred to earlier, right? Nantucket's different. We have different problems here, right? Everybody has housing, transportation, and environment issues. We have extra layers on top of those that other counties and cities don't have. So I think that it's been great. I do love the town meeting. I love that I can get up and talk, that anybody can, but not everybody does. So I think there needs to be a change at some point, not right now, but we need to keep talking about it.
We're talking about annual town meeting, and of course there are special town meetings from time to time, not necessarily every year. Well, let's go back to the term annual town meeting. Does it have to be an annual town meeting? Would it take a change in legislation or town charter to change it? Could you have multiple special town meetings?
Yeah, you could have a town meeting a month if you went through the procedures, right? And now it would be a huge tax on the resources of the town and the town clerk and Nancy to be able to put that together. But yeah, we can have more. With special town meetings, it's difficult because you have quorums. You have a 3 and a 5% quorum to move certain appropriations through. You don't have that at an annual town meeting. So our charter kind of says they put restrictions on the special town meeting, so not just anybody can call something and get something through, right? You need quorums to push things through. So there's safety nets there. So I don't think that's the answer, Charlie, but it's something to explore.
Let's talk about the select board and town offices in general. There are 3 of you running for 2 positions on the select board.
Yep.
Almost all of the other offices are up for election this year. There's no competition. You have an incumbent running unopposed. I think maybe in 1 or 2 cases, it's going to be write-ins if anybody's going to get in there. What can the town of Nantucket, the governmental entity, I mean, when I say that, what can the town of Nantucket do to encourage more people to run for office, never mind come to town meetings? Not a new problem, but a persistent one.
The town can always do more communication in trying to get people involved in civic government, right? I think it's happening now. You had to run for select board and all these elected positions before COVID came around. But if you look at who's running and how many people are running for our commissions, our committees, and our councils, it's larger than it's ever been. So I think the next time around for select board and planning board, I think there's going to be more people who want to be involved. Because of COVID, people are paying attention more and they want to serve. They want to serve their communities and they're going to want to be involved. It happened before COVID. So we're seeing that in the committees and commissions. We're seeing more people come out for the council on human services, on board of health. People want to get involved. They want to help.
Now, those 2 you just mentioned, are those among the many that are reappointed in June, I think it is,
Yes.
This year?
Yep. Select board reappoints all those in, I believe, June 17th, I think.
So you have more applicants than you have positions, is what you're saying, I think.
Yes, and that's new. Usually we don't. I mean, usually there's 2 or 3 people I think on 7 or 9 seats on council on human services, right? And now we have 12 people who applied, right? We've had the same board of health for a while. People don't apply. The incumbents keep getting reappointed, and they're doing a great job. And now we've got 5 or 6 people. We've never had that before. And so that increase in interest is happening. So I think we're going to see that in the elected positions this next go around.
Let me zero in on the Board of Selectmen because the responsibilities that the 5 people have today are greatly increased over what they had, well, even 10 years ago, but especially 40 or 50 years ago. Now, in some cases, in fact, maybe in all cases, you're getting a packet every week or almost every week, and in many cases, it is a book-length packet. Um, you're reading a book per meeting. I don't mean you personally, I mean the 5 of you. How much does that get in the way of the board doing the best job it can?
Charlie, it definitely gets in the way. You know, you can't read every word on a 300-page packet. You know, it comes out on Friday, and if you're working in your businesses and you get to it on Sunday night, but what happens once you've been in for a year or 2, a lot of the things you already know the issue and you've already studied it. So you don't have to reread a giant report that's been in a packet. And so that 300 pages gets down to maybe 50 or 100, right? Because you've already kind of like built up this and steamrolled through a lot of the issues for a while. And so I say the first year is more reading than you thought you'd ever have to do. You say 300 pages on a packet, you think, oh yeah, I can do that. And then you get it every week. And it's a lot. But after that first year, if you go through a whole cycle, you kind of start getting into a roll, and it gets, I'd say, a little easier. But this goes back to how complex our issues are, Charlie. Like it's our form of government doesn't. I don't know how to say this. When I'm in it, right? I think there's a better way out there down the road.
Talking about the increased responsibilities of the select board over the years leads to the question of the limits of growth on Nantucket. We're still adding houses and people and more visitors at times of the year when there used to be no visitors at all. This is looking way ahead, probably after I'm long gone, maybe after you're long gone as well. But at some point, Nantucket will either have to come up against the limits of growth or change itself in some way, which makes me ask, would it still be Nantucket? It's a broad question, but what are your thoughts about the limits of growth on Nantucket?
I think Nantucket is whatever you want Nantucket to be, the exact way it was when you first got here. You know, I've talked to people who came 10 years ago and they're like, it's changed. I've only been here 21 years, but I've seen the changes. It's definitely limited. We obviously can't keep expanding out. There's no urban sprawl that we can just keep going out, out, and out. I think with over 60% of our land in some kind of conservation ownership, and that will continue to grow with a land bank. On one hand, I'm not worried about it because I think the things that we're putting in place, the regulatory boards that we have, I think that will be okay. As a land bank keeps continuing to buy land. So on one hand, I feel that we're going to be okay and we can do better with growing in a smart way. On the other hand, I don't love those who come here only for profit and seeing Nantucket as a problem. I don't mean a restaurant. I mean more of the investment housing. I think I don't know if there's a clear answer of what to do about that, but I think that's one thing that concerns me. You know, if people are building their second home here and they're coming here for 6 months out of the year, that type of growth the island can absorb and can sustain. But things like investment properties are helpful to the economy in one way, but not necessarily for the environment and for the resources that we have here.
Well, at the other extreme of the housing situation, you have people who either can't find a place to live at all, or they can find a place, but they have to share it with 8 or 10 people, or they spend more than half their income on rent. Housing has taken a back seat to the pandemic for understandable reasons, but it's a problem that's still there. How do you see the island progressing at this point?
I think actually putting our resources towards it, right? As in, you know, we have Tucker Holland now. We actually have a position that's all they do is think about housing. And that the office of housing that will continue to grow. And so we have resources towards it. We had a town meeting that almost put $30 million to it. They put $20 million to the Neighborhood First Fund. That was a huge kind of win where the community came together and said, this is important to us. And so good things are happening with housing, but we have to continue to be creative. Like, we have to figure out the middle class, right? The middle class here in Nantucket is dying because they can't own anything. And giving more opportunities, being more creative with covenant homes, trying to help people get through finding, and some people are already doing this, what are the little hurdles that you saved your money, you've worked your butt off for a long time, and now you're ready to buy a house. What's that extra hurdle? Is it the closing costs? Is it all the different fees? What is it that stops people from getting in a small house that they can own so they can stay here for the remainder of their life? We're heading in the right direction, but there's more work to be done.
Even if we solve the housing problem within the next couple of years, and even if there's a vaccine for coronavirus in the next couple of years, one problem that's going to outlast those problems is climate change. And Nantucket, obviously being a low island, is always going to be affected by climate change, and in a number of ways. What's your current thinking about how Nantucket can cope with this?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts there, Charlie.
Fire away.
One is sustainable energy. I think we talk about it a little bit, but we're not really putting our time into thinking about how we can be a leader in sustainable energy, right? That's not going to stop climate change or sea level rise in the world. But if we don't do something, then who will? So I think we need to, from small things of trying to widen HDC approval of solar, things like that. Simple, we can do it, right? People want to put solar on their houses. Let's let them do it. Do we need to do it on Main Street? Maybe not. But can we do it everywhere else on the island? Trying to get our community to be comfortable with wind power, right? I know it's decisive, it's tough, but those kind of things will help. And I think planning for what happens when Washington Street, our truck route, is flooded, 30% in the winter, and then 50%. What happens? Do we move back? All the things that Jim Carberg is suggesting at the Community Foundation of shoring up our coastlines in natural ways. It's probably a 20-point plan. I think that we have a coastal resiliency group, and we've put resources to it, and we put money to it to come up with plans and start developing those plans and sandbanks and all these different things that we can do. We're heading in the right direction, just like housing, but we're not quite there. One thing, Charlie, that I saw was visuals of what 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 feet of sea level rise looks like on Nantucket. And it was seeing that visual, I think, changed a lot of people's views of seeing the juice bar, the water 5 feet up, right? Seeing cars, just seeing the very, very top of a car sitting there on Straight Wharf. Like, that's the future. And if the argument is, if it is 200 years, is it 20 years? I think seeing those things and having the conversations about it are very important, and we have to continue to do that.
It may be premature to ask this, but one of the most difficult parts of addressing climate change will be the economics. You mentioned Washington Street, for example, and you could mention Easy Street or the Brant Point area, plenty of areas that routinely flood, even if there's perfectly good weather. How do you determine what the town's responsibility is and what the private owner of land along Washington Street might be? I mean, this probably has a very high price tag attached to it, especially over time. But where do you foresee that money coming from?
Wow, that's a loaded question there, Charlie. If I had all the answers from that, I'd be sitting in 20th floor of Boston, some big, attorney, figure that one out.
Well, it's not loaded, it's just difficult.
where would that money come from? I mean, I think the taxpayers are going to have to put some money into it, right? If you're looking at roads, I think private ownership, there's property rights to deal with. Depending on which case you look at, you can find something to back up your argument. We're seeing this in Sconza with SUPF. We're seeing some little tiny things with like in the Brant Point area, right? Of the little pump station on Children's Beach, right? Like the town is taking care of that. We've been doing it, but as things break down, whose responsibility is it? I'm not really answering your question, but the town is going to have to put some resources into it for sure. Once we have a policy developed through this coastal resiliency committee, and we keep working on it over the years, there will be structure that shows like, okay, here we're going to retreat, and that's all we can do. Here we're going to put our resources into it, whether it's downtown or whether it's over here on the west side of the island. And I think having those policies and criteria will help us make better decisions, and at least doesn't look like we're just picking, oh, we'll do this in Sconset, oh, we'll do this in Nantucket, and we don't really have a bigger plan that's comprehensive to lead us through. I think we're almost there.
Before we go, tell us a bit about your background. You touched on it earlier, but let's hear more about that.
I'm a restaurant kid. I grew up in my dad's restaurant. I was bussing tables before I legally could bus tables in Indiana, and always was in service. And then I came here when I was 22, 23 for just one summer, and just kind of, I fell in love with the island. And I said when I got here that I wouldn't work in restaurants because I'd done it my whole life. My family was involved in it. And of course, I went right into restaurants. I started working at Foods. That's where I first met you, Charlie.
That's right.
Making a small pizza, hamburger and mushrooms, if I do believe so.
You've got a great memory.
So I was there for 10 years, learning how to manage, learning how to live on Nantucket and loving it. And then starting two small businesses on my own, the bike tours and the coffee shop, and kind of got into on a very small scale the business world here. And then just being on boards and nonprofits and being able to serve for the select board, that's kind of and then now being a new dad, that's my background.
Jason Bridges, thank you for being part of Nantucket Community Television's coverage of the 2020 annual town election. And to all of our viewers, please be sure to vote on or before June 16th. I'm Charlie Walters. Thank you for tuning in.